Sunshine Canyon. As with his intrusions, he performed the same show of groping her and himself. He then returned to her home once he was finished. Noreen immediately reported the crime to the police and picked Glatman out of a mugshot book. He was quickly detained by the police and was sentenced to 1 year at Colorado State Prison, but was released early on good behaviour just 8 months later. Concerned for her son, Glatman's mother Ophelia took him to see a psychiatrist. At just 19 years old, these were not normal teenage inclinations, and she wanted him to get help. The doctor believed that he was scared of women and suggested that he should involve himself in new hobbies where he could interact with women easily, like dancing. His mother suggested that he move back to New York, and she found him an apartment in Yonkers. She also got him a job at a local TV repair shop, which was a skill he'd learned in prison. On the 17th of August 1946, Glatman attacked Thomas Starrow and Doris Thorne as they were walking. He tied up Thomas with the rope he brought with him and began to rape Doris while aiming a toy gun at her. Thomas managed to free himself from the bindings and attacked Glatman, who was otherwise occupied. Glatman managed to twist free from Thomas's grip and cut him with the penknife he was carrying. The cut made Thomas retreat, and Glatman ran and found himself on a train to Albany, 2 hours north of New York. A few days later, on the 22nd of August, Glatman attacked Florence Hayden. He pushed the nurse into a yard as she walked down Main Avenue in Albany and told her to stay quiet as he pointed his toy gun at her. While he tied her up with rope he had in his pocket, she realised that he wasn't holding the gun anymore, so she screamed and pushed him away from her. Florence Hayden escaped unharmed, telling police that her assailant looked more frightened than she was. The following evening, to fulfill his urges, Glatman approached 2 women in Albany. He planned to attack them both, but as he reached them, he lost his confidence. He instead demanded they give him their money, whilst he waved his toy gun at them. Evelyn Berg and Beverly Goldstein handed over their purses, and he ran off, mumbling to himself. Police Commissioner James Kerwin and his team received the report from the 2 women and matched it to Florence Hayden's and Thomas Starrow and Doris Thorne's descriptions of their attacker. 2 days later, Harvey Glatman was arrested. He was in the process of following his next victim when he was apprehended, carrying the toy gun, the rope, and the pocket knife. Once captured, he immediately confessed to his crimes. In 1946, at 19 years old, he was sentenced to 5 to 10 years. Because he wasn't 21 yet, he was initially transferred to Elmira Correctional Facility, but would later spend time in Sing Sing Correctional Facility, both in the state of New York. At Sing Sing, Glatman underwent a number of psychiatric examinations, which reported him as not definitely mental defective or psychotic. In 1948, after just 2 years, Glatman was released early on good behaviour again. He was returned to the care of his mother and was kept under observation as part of his parole conditions, which continued for 4 years. In January agencies looking for victims. A 19-year-old going through a laborious child custody battle for her daughter, Judy was using modelling jobs to pay the court bills and was keen to book as many shoots as she could. On the 1st of August, Glatman called Judy on the number given to him by her agency and told her of the exciting opportunity he had concocted. He asked her to wear street clothes and told her that they could even shoot at her apartment if it made her feel more comfortable. She shared her apartment with 2 other models and would be paid $50 for her work. That's around $450 in today's money. It was an easy job. Later that day, Glatman arrived at Judy's apartment. He told her that the lighting wasn't right for this particular shoot and he would like to go to his studio instead. After meeting Glatman, the scrawny, awkward man, Judy decided that he wasn't a threat and agreed to leave with him. He gave his phone number to Judy's flatmate Betty, led Judy out to his car and drove her to his apartment. When they arrived, he explained to Judy that the photo shoot included bondage and he would need to tie her up. Once she was in position, he went through with the photo shoot, waving his newly purchased real gun around and told her to look scared. When the photo shoot was finished, he raped her several times, losing his virginity in the process. He then made her sit down next to him, cuddle on the sofa and watch TV. At around 10:30 p.m, Glatman told Judy that he was ready to let her go, but would need to leave her in the middle of nowhere. He tied her wrists again and led her to his car by gunpoint. He then drove her 100 miles southeast, outside of Los Angeles, near Thousand Palms. When they finally arrived, he lassoed her neck, pushed her down onto her knees, and hog-tied her. He then pulled on the rope until she was dead. Meanwhile, Judy's flatmates were growing concerned that she wasn't home from the photo shoot yet. Betty called the phone number Glatman had left her, but soon realised it wasn't the number for his studio. Betty then called the police and gave them a description of the man who drove Judy away in his car. The police put out a bulletin for Glatman, but no one came forward. Judy was discovered 4 miles from Indio, just off the highway. Glatman had taken the rope with him and buried Judy in a shallow grave, which had been dug at by animals who eventually reached her body. She would be known as Jane Doe for many months. 24-year-old Shirley met Glatman on the Lonely Hearts Club, which were advertisements in newspapers for those looking for love. He had answered the advert as George Williams and met the divorced mother of 2 at her home on Tuxford Street in Sun Valley. Stunned by the number of people who greeted him at Shirley's home, he quickly got her into his car under the deception of going dancing. When they began driving, he told Shirley he had a headache and instead they went for dinner in Oceanside. After the dinner, they returned to his car where they kissed and fooled around for a while. Glatman then started to drive but headed east instead of north, which would take them back to Los Angeles. When he arrived at Anza Borrego Desert State Park, he told Shirley to undress as he pointed his gun at her. He raped Shirley several times and forced her out of the car, where he tied her up and took photos. The bulb in his flash broke, and so they waited until sunrise so he could take more photos of her. He then strangled her and took further pictures, where he positioned her how he wanted. Once he was done, he left her body recently moved from New York to Los Angeles. Glatman abducted Ruth and subjected her to the same horrors as Shirley and Judy. Her remains would eventually be found near Shirley Bridgeford's unburied body. On the 27th of July, Ruth's landlord grew concerned about his tenant's 4-day absence. He opened the door to her room and found her dogs and birds on the verge of death. He contacted the police about the disappearance of his tenant, who went on a photo shoot with a photographer and never returned. New to modelling, 28-year-old Lorraine was eager for her first paid photo shoot. Her agency told her that Glatman, known to them as Frank Johnson, would pick her up from her apartment at 8 p.m. that night. Once in the car, Lorraine asked Glatman questions about where they were heading. Her agency had already told her to be careful of Glatman, as they knew him to be an amateur photographer rather than a professional. Many of them just wanted images of stripping women for their own collection. When they passed the Anaheim exit on the freeway, Lorraine grew concerned and began asking more questions about their destination. Glatman snapped and veered off the road, crossing 2 lanes of traffic, and came to a sharp stop, claiming to have a flat tyre. He then tried to tie Lorraine up with the rope he had, but she resisted him. He pulled out his gun, but instead of backing off, Lorraine grabbed the other end, and the two fought for control until the pistol went off and grazed Lorraine's leg. Glatman released his grip from the gun, and Lorraine jumped out of the car. He then tried to grab her before she made her escape, but he was too late and she took the gun and ran. His erratic driving had caught the attention of a passing police car, which was now driving towards them. Lorraine dropped the gun and ran to the 2 policemen, while Glatman cowered inside his car. Harvey Glatman was taken to the Orange County jail where he was questioned. He quickly confessed to the killings, and police were sent to his apartment to find the toolbox he spoke about in his statement. The toolbox was full of the images he had taken of the rapes and murders he had committed. They were lovingly processed with care in his homemade darkroom. The studio where his toolbox was discovered also contained clothing from some of his victims. Glatman wasn't jailed immediately. Investigators wanted the remains of his victims to build a solid case against the serial killer, but also to provide closure to the victims' families. A convoy of policemen and the prisoner travelled first to Anza State Park, where Glatman revealed the location of Shirley Bridgeford's remains. He hadn't bothered to bury Shirley because he didn't believe anyone would ever find her. Her remains were scattered over an area of desolate land due to animal interference, but there was just enough to identify her. The police and Glatman then continued down the road to Ruth Machado. Her body was mostly intact and there was still hair on her skull. The next day, investigators and Glatman continued their mission to unearth Judy Doll. However, her remains weren't where Glatman had left them. Her body had been found a few months earlier, where she had been tagged as a Jane Doe. On the 15th of December 1958, Glatman pleaded guilty by reason of insanity. He was sentenced to death for the murders of Shirley Bridgeford and Ruth Machado and transferred to San Quentin Prison, 400 miles north of Los Angeles. On the 18th of September 1959, Glatman was executed by gas chamber. He was 31 years old. That was the story of Harvey Glatman. Thank you for listening today. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and check back tomorrow for a new case upload. Until then.